All right. So this data factory resource is a cloud-based ETL service. All right. It's a data integration service which is provided by Azure, obviously. And data factory, it allows organizations to create data-driven workflows. All right. So they'll enable seamless data orchestration, data transformation, and movement across various systems at scale. All right. So it allows for data orchestration, data transformation, right? So when you talk about data orchestration, right? Data orchestration is it basically refers to the automated and the continuous movement or seamless movement and processing of data between different systems, right? So the all right. So when I say data orchestration and data transformation, right? Data ADF helps you with that. So what does data orchestration mean, right? So in very simple terms, data orchestration, it refers to the automated movement of data, all right, and processing as well. So automated movement plus processing of data across two systems, right? So you take the data, let's say from the data lake, and you transform it and you put it into the uh, let's say SQL database. So then this movement of data, right? And automating this movement of data is known as data orchestration. So Azure Data Factory will help you orchestrate this data movement. All right. So it will pull data from various sources. It can be from database. It could be through APIs. It could be on a cloud storage and a real-time streaming data could be there. And then it defines and executes complex data processing workflows without any manual intervention, right? So that is what ADF lets you do. It lets you process your data plus move your data, right? Process will have transformations involved, movement of data from one place to the other. All of it will be with zero human intervention. The pipelines will work automatically. The pipelines will be responsible to get the data. The pipelines will be responsible to put the data, and the pipeline itself will define certain activities for the transformation of the data. All right. Now, to ensure timely execution of these tasks that you are going to define, right, to process the data and to move the data, right, uh, you will have, scheduled pipelines. You will have an option to schedule it at a daily, let's say at a particular time or a particular time interval, right? And you'll also get to monitor the errors and the inefficiencies of these pipelines. All right. It will also help you maintain policies for access control, compliance, security. So basically, overall data governance and security measures. And then it is scalable, right? It can adjust dynamically based on the workload needs and optimize the performance across environments, right? So that is the concept of data orchestration, right? And data transformation, you already know. So with ADF, users can connect to a wide variety of sources, perform transformations, and then load the process data into a desired destination, right? So covering end-to-end ETL, right? Now, the primary goal of data factory is that it simplifies the traditional method of data integration. All right. It simplifies the entire method, unlike writing manual scripts now. So you don't have to write manual scripts anymore. Bye bye. All right. And you also do not have need to create a local compute. All right. That would process this compute intensive data processing task. ADF provides a managed service. All right. The moment you call it a managed service, what does this mean? What does managed service mean? All right. Managed service means, first of all, that it will be completely managed by Azure. All right. How the transformation happens, what steps are performed, that will only be described by the user. But to carry out those transformation, to create or to move the data, there is no human intervention required. Azure will take care of it from their end. Even the compute. Even the compute within data factory is not something that you have to worry about at all. In your dedicated SQL pool, yes, you were worried about creating, selecting the proper compute, what DW units you should select, but that is not going to be the case here. You're not going to select the compute. All right. It eliminates the need for a complex setup, right, or a dedicated machine. Not required. All right. So there are certain core features of data factory. Let's discuss them one by one. Right. So features of data factory, first of all, it helps with the orchestration of data workflows, right? It enables the creation of workflows. Workflows basically is something that we use in terms of data engineering. We use workflows for pipelines. Well, this is another term that we generally use for pipelines. And when you go to Databricks, you will generally hear the term workflows only, right? We generally do not call them pipelines there. We call them delta live tables workflows, right? So we create these pipelines for orchestrating the data movement between sources and destination, and then transformation as well. All right. So there is scalable data transformation here. All right. So using ADF, you can clean, you can modify, you can enrich the data at scale without requiring extensive manual coding. All right. No manual coding required. All right. This is a UI platform where you define the transformation through some drag and drop activities. All right. So these activities is what you're going to define, and then you have to just configure those activities. If you remember from our discussion in Synapse, what we were doing, we just putting the activities and we were configuring those activities, nothing else. Right. Secondly, thirdly, it supports a wide range of data stores. It can help you connect to a wide range of data stores. It can help you seamlessly connect with numerous data sources such as database, file storage, cloud services, big data platforms, all of it, right? The fourth key feature is that you get a managed infrastructure. All right. So what does managed infra means? ADF eliminates the need for provisioning hardwares, right? You do not have to provision any hardware here. You don't have to manage any compute also here. As I said, there is no compute, no hardware required. There is hardware, obviously. Data processing requires hardware and compute, but this is not something that you have to manage. Managed infra, managed by Azure itself. All right. So the entire underlying infrastructure of your data factory resource and how the transformation takes place, it is going to be managed by Microsoft Azure. All right. It's very easy to use. Yes, if I was given a task to write a script to move a pipeline from one data store to the other, it becomes really difficult to write the code, right? Because first of all, you have to establish the connection to the data stores, then you have to transfer the file between the data stores, and you have to bring it to a your processing platform, and then you have to write the code to process that data. On top of that, then once you're done, you have to connect to the destination data store and then transfer the file to the destination data store also. So this entirely on the whole is a very long code that you may have to write, right? And there will be a lot of errors also over time that you will face. But pipelines, on the other hand, they eliminate all of this manual coding. It's a very user-friendly interface. It supports for the drag and drop activities that you have. And ADF, in very simple terms, it simplifies the creation of a data pipeline also. All right. So imagine that you have a Parquet-based file. Let's say you have a Parquet-based file. Now, let's say this is stored in data lake, something that we have already seen, right? Your objective is, let's say, to extract specific columns from, let's say, this file, and you want to remove any rows or columns that contain null values. You want to load the cleaned and transformed data into a SQL data warehouse. Now, the traditional approach to perform this task would have been right before the tools like Azure Data Factory were there. This process would require significant manual efforts. All right, you might a developer needed to write a script file, example in Python, .NET, Java, whatever language, right? The script would, as I said, load the Parquet file into the local machine, extract specific columns, perform all the transformations, load the process data into a SQL data warehouse. Now the entire data set has to be processed in memory on the compute machine which is running the script, right? So when you are running the script on your own compute machine, there is also some challenges associated with it, right? First of all, there is a compute limitation, right? Large data sets, they often exceed the memory capacity of local machines, causing failure, right? Then it was also very complex. Writing custom scripts and managing errors, it requires advanced programming knowledge, and it was very inefficient also at times, right? Manual processes are time consuming, prone to errors, and they lack scalability. That is why Data Factory came in and changed the game. All right. It addresses all these challenges of the traditional approach, and it gives you a managed automated solution for data ingestion, data integration, right? So there's no need for custom scripts now. Instead of creating complex code, you can use ADF's visual interface to design the workflow. There is no local computer machines required. ADF will run all the processes on the Azure's managed infrastructure, right? It removes the need for a dedicated hardware, and then it seamlessly integrates. ADF, it offers built-in support for connecting to both the source and the destination, which in our example case is the data lake and the SQL data warehouse systems. But apart from this, it lets you connect to a lot of third-party systems also. All right. And finally, the most important benefit is that all of this execution is automated. All right. Data pipelines in ADF are executed automatically in the cloud. There is minimal user intervention required. So here also, you will find the same terms. First, link service, data set, pipeline, activities, AIR. AIR stands for Azure Integration Runtime. These are all what? These are all artifacts that you have. Clear? So now let's go ahead and create an EDF resource itself and see how you're going to do that. Synapse is pretty different, right? Because Synapse offers you SQL pool, Spark pool, Data Explorer pool. Synapse pipeline is what you can say is similar to Data Factory, but then the differences also we'll see. Data flows also. You add data flows also here. Absolutely correct. Data flows also are artifacts. All right. But when you define data flow in the pipeline, it would be added as an activity only. All right. So you can also write activity. All right. So when you create the data flow in the pipeline, you add the data flow activity, correct? If you work with data flows, you can consider it to be a part of activities only, right? But if you want to write it separately, it's absolutely fine. Data flow is again a very big concept in data factory. Clear? Now we know that Azure Data Factory is a powerful tool, right? That is something that we already know. Uh, for your orchestration, integration of data workflows across various platforms. But you also have to understand the cost implication of the features which are present here, right? For effective usage, especially in scenarios that involves prolonged infrastructural requirements where you want to continue with data factory for a very long duration, right? So when you are analyzing the Azure subscription cost, right, you will see that, or you will notice that the Azure Data Factory, it incurs significant charges. All right. Especially if you're using data flows. If you use data flows in your pipeline, then the cost is significantly higher. The mapping data flow, it allows users to design and execute scalable transformations of large data sets in a very code-free environment. All right. It's a key component for data transformation. And also, it's often a focal point in the uh, when you try to cover the training or the certification related to data engineering, right? Data flows is something that everybody will ask in interviews as well. It is very resource intensive. That is why you have to keep an eye when you're working with data flows, right? It can drive up the cost. Yeah, sorry, I was checking if the screen is shared or not. All right, so it can drive up the cost, especially when infrastructure is kept active for an extended period, right? So something that may occur during activities like, you know, now the data flow activity, right? So an important feature which is tied to mapping data flow is again called as data flow debug mode. All right. So I'm just discussing these things before we start with the data factory itself. There is something called as a data flow debug mode. Now this debug mode, which enables real-time debugging of your data flow pipelines, right? This feature will provide you insights into the transformations, right? And will ensure accuracy, but it also contributes to the cost, all right? Because data flow debugging, it takes a lot of, or it requires a lot of computation, all right? So there are a lot of computational demands here. So running the data flow debug mode or leaving the infrastructure running unnecessarily, it can lead to higher charges. All right. So if you're using Azure Data Factory for short-term or standard operation, these costs they might be minimal, right? Just to practice, if you're doing it, the cost will be minimal. But if you're doing it for a long duration in an organizational setup, right, then it's going to cost a lot of money. All right. So to optimize the cost, it's critical to manage your infrastructure wisely, right? Uh, a key recommendation from my side would be to shut down the unnecessary infrastructure at the end of each practice session that you have, right? If you're working with the, let's say the free Azure account that you have, right? If you're working there, or even if you're working in your own subscription, right? Get rid of any unnecessary infrastructure as soon as possible, right? All right. So let's go ahead and create this resource and see what we're talking about. Right? Create a data factory resource. Now, this is something very different from Synapse, right? How you work with data factory is different from Synapse because first of all, let me create a new resource group. Azure Data Engineering batch 6. All right. The name would be NIC Data Factory. All right. The region, let's select as East US 2, right? And the version is V2. All right. V1 does not exist anymore. And that is all. That is all that goes into the creation of data factory. Now, what difference do you see from Synapse over here? Does this look different from Synapse? Yes or no? There is no SQL pool here, obviously, because you do not write code in data factory. You're not required to write any code here. The mandatory provision of having a data lake. Yes, absolutely. Earlier, it was mandatory for us to have a data lake, which is not mandatory anymore, right? So there's no data factory here. Git configuration is there, right? And we'll select on configure the Git later. Networking settings. So there's a self-hosted integration runtime. We'll talk about this later on, but just remember that sometimes the Azure integration runtime, it does not connect to resources from outside, all right, or data stores which are outside Azure. Azure integration runtimes works best for Azure-based resources. So if your file, your data is residing outside Azure, in those cases, you have to use a different integration runtime or different compute service. That is self-hosted integration runtime. So we'll discuss about this. And it says if you want to connect to the self-hosted integration runtime, you connect through the public endpoint for the data factory resource, right? That is fine. Now, if you want encryption using the customer managed key, right? Microsoft managed keys will be there. The data by default will be encrypted with Microsoft managed keys. But if you want to integrate, use your own keys for, let's say, the encryption process, right? So in that case, you can use your own keys, right? Let's just review and create this. All right. And this will be created very quickly. This resource does not require anything. It gets created within minutes. See, done. The moment we create it, it's done. Right? Now, here, one thing that you have to keep in mind that when you talk about the cost of using the Azure Azure integration runtime, the compute which is there, right? The integration runtime, the charges are based on the compute resources used to execute the activities in the pipeline. All right. For example, the copy activity in Azure Data Factory will use the Azure integration runtime to move the data securely and reliably. It's self-hosted integration runtime will use your on-premise, uh, let's say, compute, right? And SSIS integration, we'll talk about that later. So as of now, there's nothing that you need to know about Data Factory, and this is what gets created, the NIC Data Factory resource. Again, similar to your Synapse Studio, there is something called as Data Factory Studio that you have to launch. All right, so you can launch the Data Factory Studio like this. Just close this as well. And this is exactly what the Data Factory resource looks like. Does it look very similar to Synapse? So you get to create pipelines, you get to transform your data, right? These are quick, uh, I would say, quick ways to create or ingestion pipeline, orchestration pipeline, transformation pipeline, and then configuration of SSIS is something that we'll see later on. Now here you can Power Query is not something that we're going to cover, right? It does not something that we are worried about as of now. We are worried about the pipelines, we are worried about the data flows and the data sets, right? Now in the author section, you get to create the pipeline. Now, this pipeline creation page is completely different from what you had in Synapse, right? In Synapse, you would not have these pipelines, change data capture, data sets, data flows, Power Query section. You did not have these, right? In the monitor section, again, you can monitor all the pipeline runs here. You can monitor all the triggered runs, right? Whether it was a scheduled trigger, whether it was a tumbling window trigger, whether it was a storage event trigger, or whether you had defined your own trigger, right? So any pipeline that has been triggered except the manual trigger will show over here. All right. Change data capture is basically to load delta data, right? Incremental data load. How many of you heard the concept of incremental data load? Heard the concept? Yes. Incremental data load is a concept where you do not load the entire data set again to the cloud. You only load what's new, right? Whatever new data has been added to your database will be then taken ahead, right? So that is for incremental data loading. Then you have the integration runtime here. You have the default Azure integration runtime, right? The auto resolve integration runtime is the Azure integration runtime that we have, right? So it's running, it's always running. You do not have to, start it, stop it. It will continue to run, right? This Azure integration runtime, it continues to run. Then you can create a self-hosted integration runtime. It will show up here, right? You can create the Azure integration runtime is already there. And these two runtimes are the ones that we are going to work with. In the manage section, you will find everything related to the factory. Is there a way to expand this? No, but now this is the factory settings, right? How do you want to show the billing? By pipeline or by factory? All right, do you want to see the cost of each pipeline, or do you want to see the cost of each or the entire data factory resource itself? How do you want to see the billing? Then You can set up the staging location for the entire workspace itself. All right, here you have an option to set up staging for the entire workspace altogether, right? Connector upgrade, right? These are basically when you connect to an external data store, right? There, you may have some, connectors which are default, right? That you get by default, and sometimes you may need an upgrade on the connector, right? Let's say to increase the throughput of your data movement, or let's say to connect, to reduce the latency of data movement. Sometimes those platforms, they would require some upgrade in the connection, right? How is the connection established? Connection is established through link services, right? Link services, they allow you to connect to various data stores, and you can see here, if you select, right, you'll find almost all the data source that you had in Synapse, or even more here, right? So Azure based resources, uh, Sandra, Dataverse, Dynamic CRM, GitHub, right? Google BigQuery, Google Sheets, Hive Data Store, HDFS, right? HDFS is for um, your Hadoop systems, right? Hadoop distributed file store. So HDFS is there, Jira is there, MariaDB, Microsoft Access, M365, Fabric Lakehouse, Fabric Warehouse, MongoDB, right? ODBC, Oracle, PayPal, PostgreSQL. All these different stores are available that you can connect to. ServiceNow, Spark, right? Snowflake. You can connect to all different stores. Teradata also there, right? Teradata is also there. So these are all the different stores available, right? Connecting link service to Azure compute services, right? Whether say, let's say you want to connect to Azure Databricks from your data factory. So you can use this particular link service. If you want to connect to Azure machine learning services, using your data factory, you can connect it from here. Azure functions, right? So various other services also. These are Azure-based services. These are compute-based services. The Azure Synapse Analytics Artifacts, Azure Machine Learning Studio, Azure HD Insight. We're not going to worry about all of that as of now. Then, uh, after link service, you have the integration runtime, right? One second. So this is where I can go ahead and create a new self-hosted integration runtime if you want to create, right? And it's a very simple process. I can just select that it's going to be a self-hosted integration runtime. And basically what you do in self-hosted integration runtime is that you select your own compute to, work as the compute provider. So you'll have your own machines. You'll use those machines as the compute provider for your pipelines, right? And if I want to transfer data from, let's say, my Windows machine to Azure Data Factory, then I can convert that particular Windows machine into a self-hosted integration runtime, and I can use that self-hosted integration runtime to do data movement between my on-premise environment and Azure environment. And don't worry, we'll cover all of that also. You have Microsoft Purview here. Now, Purview is a comprehensive suite of solutions which is designed to help organizations, right, to govern, to protect, and to manage their data across various environments, right? Basically, through Purview, you are integrating data security along with data governance and compliance as well into a unified platform, right? So this ensures that businesses can maintain visibility, safeguard their sensitive information, and meet the regulatory requirements, right? So Purview provides a centralized approach to data management. It addresses all the challenges such as data fragmentation, lack of visibility, and evolving compliance needs, right? Now it enables organizations to gain insights into their data estates, right? It can protect sensitive information across the life cycle of data, can govern the data as well across your on-premise and cloud and SaaS environments, and it can manage the risks and regulatory requirements effectively. All right. When you talk about security, Purview offers a lot of security solutions to help organizations, right, to protect their sensitive data, right? So you have something called as DLP, right, which is very common nowadays, that can be implemented through Purviews, that is called as the data loss prevention. All right. So it prevents any unauthorized sharing of any sensitive information. You have data security posture management, information protection, insider risk management, privileged access management, right? Privileged access management will control who has access to critical data and critical data systems. So we'll work with Purview. We'll try to see what Purview offers as well. Then the same Git configuration is here, right? You can connect to your GitHub or Azure repositories, right? And manage the entire code over here that you have. Then you have the ARM template also. This ARM template, how many of you remember the concept of ARM template? Just tell me in the chat window. How many of you remember what ARM template was, what it did, how it worked? JSON file, right? And what did the JSON file do? Yes, basically not. See, that is Azure Resource Manager. The validation of resources is done by Azure Resource Manager. The ARM template is the JSON file that helps you recreate resources. All right. Now, if I want to go ahead and recreate this entire data factory resource somewhere, right? Let's say some other place I want to take this data factory resource and recreate it. So then what I can use is I can use these ARM templates. All right. Clear now? I can use the ARM template and what I can do is you can see the export button here. I can, click on this export button and it will download, the ARM template for me. And it's basically a zip file which contains two files, parameter.json, right? One is the parameter file itself and one is the template.json. So template.json and parameters.json together, they create uh, you know, uh, the entire infrastructure details are mentioned over here. So I can import on Azure portal. If I want to create a data factory resource, I can import it on the Azure portal. Or if I want to create a copy of this data factory resource itself entirely, then I can go ahead and export the ARM template from here. Then there are certain, triggers that I can add for my pipelines, right? It could be a schedule trigger, it could be a tumbling window, it could be a storage event, it could be a custom event, right? So we'll try to see what all these different triggers are. You have global parameters that you can add to your pipelines, right? So this is very important when you're working with tumbling windows. Data flow, we'll talk more on data flow later on. Credentials, credentials also we'll see. Customer managed keys is for your encryption, right? And outbound rule is for your data movement. All right. Now, this is fine. And then finally, you have a learning center here, right? So this will contain all the tutorials, all the videos that you can go through in order to learn data factory resource. All right. So it's very simple. If you see, let me just show you. If I want to create a pipeline, I'll just click on this plus icon over here and I'll create a pipeline, right? So this is how I'm going to go ahead and create the pipeline. So there are various activities here. You'll see some activities, which you had already seen in Synapse. Most of the activities are present in Synapse also, right? But then on top of it, it provides you with data flow and other things that can help you with very extreme and let's say very complex transformations. So the entire process is the same. If there is a copy data activity, you are going to go ahead and create the entire rule. The source you're going to define, the sink you're going to define, the mapping you're going to define, right, of data, and then the settings of copy data if there is any, right? So like this, you're going to again create the same pipelines, right? The process is exactly the same. We'll try to see some more examples when it comes to data factory. We'll see more examples. If I go to data flow, right, if I want to create a new data flow, so this is what the data flow interface looks like. Again, I can add a source, right? Source one, I need to first define the source. Where is this source, right? Where is this data coming from, right? Source options, all of that we need to define first. Once again, right? So where is this data set? About source one, where is the data coming from? So I can select a data set, existing data set, right? Or I can, connect to a particular data store and then I can define the data set. Then there are options like allow schema drift. What is schema drift? Right? Infer drifted column types, validate the schema. What are these different options? That is also something that we'll see. Uh, Apart from that, I can add multiple sources here, right? So the difference between the pipeline and this particular data flow is that when you work with pipelines, see, you can only define a single source for your data, correct? You only define a particular single source. The data set is one. Is everybody able to see here? Or you want me to zoom in? When I select the source data set, I can only select one single data source over here. When I start working with data flows, I can define multiple data sources. I can define multiple sources, right? And then I can say what happens after this particular data has been fetched. So I can click on this plus icon. Now what I can do, I can create join of these different sources, right? I can say I want to perform join on the first source and the second source. What I'll do, I'll say that this is going to be a join. The left stream is source one, right? The second right stream would be source two or source three. And I want to perform full outer join, inner join, left outer, right outer, right? Let's select inner join. So basically, this particular inner join will, create an inner join between the first data source and the second data source that you have. Then you can, select particular rows. You can aggregate rows, right? You can filter it, you can sort it, and then you can put it to the sink also, right? So this will become my destination, right? So sink will have the sink data set where you actually want to put this data. So like this, you define the data flow. And if you enable the data flow debug here, this is what we were talking about. It will check the entirety of your data flow, how it is working, whether it's working fine or not, whether the configurations that you've done, they are correct or not, right? So before you actually trigger the data flow, you can go ahead and check whether it is going to work properly or not. Now, one thing that you would find different from Synapse, link services are empty. How many link services were there in Synapse by default? Two, right? So by default, we had two link services within Synapse, but here we do not have any. That is because it is not connected to any data store by default. Data factory is not connected to any data store. That is why if I go to my data lake, right? Let me go to the identity and access management. Let me check access if this data factory has access to my resource. Now, when I connected my Synapse workspace, right? At that time, you would have seen that by default, access was added for the Synapse workspace onto my data lake. Now it's a managed identity. I want to check it for data factory over here. I'll select the data factory resource. Now I'll see there is no role assignment for the data factory, right? So by default, data factory will not have access to your data lake. It does not have it. That is why when you're working with data factory based resources, you have to explicitly create a connection between the data factory and the data lake because the default connection does not exist. So you do not have any link service here. Now, why do you think people prefer data factory over your traditional, let's say, scripts and all? Yeah. So the question is for everybody, simple coding, but there is no coding at all. All right. So I'll explain and I'll give you a very convincing reason as to why, as an organization, you would spend money on data factory rather than, getting developers who would write the code for you. Now imagine a situation that, write it down as well. Imagine a situation where you were using your traditional computer programmers, right, to write the code for your data movement along with data transformation. And this is totally the ETL, right? Data movement. Either you're extracting data, you're loading data, that is data movement, and then transformation here. So ETL process. Now, when you use code, let's say you're using Python to write this program, you used a particular framework, you're using particular libraries. So what happens? These programming languages, these libraries, the frameworks, over the time, they evolve. Correct? Yes or no? Every programming language is evolving. You get Python 2, Python 3, then inside 3, you have different version 3.4, 3.5, 3.6. It keeps on evolving. And certain capabilities, they become obsolete as well after a particular duration, let's say 4 or 5 years. There, it's bound to happen that certain libraries, they will become obsolete. Certain, uh, you know, technology within the code itself, it becomes obsolete. Older version will lose support. There would be performance improvement. There would be compatibility issues with the newer systems also, right? So if somebody had written code in Python 2, can you imagine how much problem they would be facing right now to make their code compatible to all the newer systems? Do you understand the issue here? Yes. If the software is written in a very legacy language, right, it may struggle in modern environments. On top of that, as business grows, their needs will change. Code that worked for earlier requirement may no longer meet the current expectations, right? And security updates also. Have you seen there are regular security updates coming in? Yes or no? Security standards are changing rapidly. So therefore, the older code that you may have written, it may not meet the modern security standards which are there, right? So the systems are open to exploitation also now. The hardware also changes. Code might be written for hardware that's no longer widely used, so that makes it incompatible with the newer systems. So that is why you would have heard of this term. Have you heard of this term? Modernizing code, migration and modernization. Have you heard of these two terms at least? Migration and modernization. No? All right. Migration means that you're, picking up your, let's say, existing workload from the on-premise environment and you're putting to the cloud environment. Now, obviously, the version in which, or the language, that framework, the library is used to create your application, it may not be supported on the cloud because the cloud will always support the latest technology. It will always support the latest version of anything. So therefore, your code will also need some modernizing from time to time. That means to bring it up to the standards of the newer standards that were released recently. So do you understand the problem? The code modernization is a big issue, and that is something which organizations are spending a lot on today, right? Because their legacy applications, they fail to work in the modern scenarios. Understood now the meaning of modernization? All right. So to stay relevant and functional, the code needs regular updates, right? And migration to newer systems also. Do you think all of this is required in Data Factory? Do you think all of this is required? All of this is a headache? The answer is no. This is not at all a headache in Data Factory. Why? Because eventually, when you use the UI to design the pipeline, all right, even though you have used UI based elements to create the pipeline, what works in the backend? When you create a pipeline, you define the source, you define the transformation, you define the destination. Eventually, in the backend, there will be code that will running, right? Code will be running in the backend. You have designed it using visual interface, right? But every visual interface will have a backend code, yes or no? Corresponding code will be created in the backend that will be executed. Now, who manages this code? Who manages the code? Who do you think? Who will manage? We are not writing this code. So who's writing this code? Microsoft is writing this code, right? So when you create pipeline to connect from one data store to the other data store, right? In that case, Microsoft in our case, right? So in that case, you don't have to worry about, the evolution of the code, which was a big problem if you were not using these pipelines. So organizations today want a solution that will work for a longer duration without any interruptions, right? And for that, this is perfect. Pipelines are perfect, correct? Because they would define the logic, they would define all the transformation, but eventually they don't have to write the code. And it's perfect for people coming from various different backgrounds, right? We can have a Java developer, a Python developer, a JavaScript developer, a .NET developer. Everybody could come in and create these pipelines with ease. All right. Now it's not like if only a Python developer can do this, only a Java developer. It does not matter which programming language you knows, the developer knows, right? They'll be able to create these pipelines with ease. All right. So is this clear to all of you? The basic introduction to the Azure Data Factory. All right then. So we'll stop here for the day. All right. And we'll continue from here tomorrow. Thank you everyone for joining in.